It's time to get informed, America. Today we're talking how Fed Chair Jay Powell dashed market hopes of a V-shaped recovery. We're also talking about what will police reform look like, and on the topic of statues and monuments, why are our local leaders cowering to the mob? All that and much, much more.
You're listening to Get Informed, America, the only true unfiltered show that's fighting fake news and finding common ground. Now, here's your hosts, Dave Oakenquist and Rodney Johnson.
Hello and welcome to Get Informed, America, the show that breaks through the mainstream media box to bring you real, smart news. Hi, I'm Dave Oakenquist, and joining me is the Sultan of Sanity, the Wizard of Wit, and the smartest man I know, Mr. Rodney Johnson, the editor of InformedAmerican.com. Rodney, welcome.
Good morning, Dave. Kind of an exuberant welcome. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to bestow these titles upon you, and I think
I'll
those
take
are pretty good. Last week you were the breaker of chains or something. So, but so these two might stick because. Anyways, Ronnie, how has your week been? And are you excited to go over some of the main highlights in culture and politics and the bullcrap of the world?
Week's been good. It's been busy. We're getting to summer. We're seeing things reopen around the nation, and so kind of watching the virus, infections rise along with hospitalizations in some areas. So, yeah, it's a crazy world out there, and of course the protests and the thing going on now in Seattle. It's an interesting world. It's definitely the Chinese proverb, or rather the curse, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah, no thank you. I want to go back to boring.
Yep.
Speaking of things opening up, I got a government-sanctioned haircut, Rodney.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. High and tight, as they say.
That's right. Well, I had the wife cut the hair about a month or two ago, and she did a job.
This is on record, Dave. So your line is you appreciate it very much, and just
well, that's true. In fact, I did. But I was happy to see my guy. So, anyways, Ronnie, if you're ready, let's get into our main topics. And I think the thing to start with is the economy, Rodney. We saw the markets. Of course, they tanked, over from between February and late March, but have been coming back really, really strongly. In fact, the Nasdaq made an all-time high, but our Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell was just came in the nick of time to throw a wet blanket on all of our hopes of what they've been calling the V-shaped recovery, which is when things tank really bad but just kind of come right back up. And you and I have been talking about this for a while, but Jay Powell said, "Hold on, this is not going to happen." Got a couple of figures here. He expects the economy to contract by 6.5% for the year, come back and grow next year, but also the unemployment rate, something you've harped on a couple times, Rodney. He expects the unemployment rate to be 9.3% in 2020, 6.5% in 2021, and still 5.5% in 2022. And investors did not like this news. I mean, I don't know what they were expecting. I mean, it's never going to come back exactly, but definitely spooked the markets, and they puked up a lot of the gains that they had recovered. So, what do you think of all this, Rodney, and this wet blanket that Chair Powell threw on everything?
Well, I mean, Jay Powell didn't throw a blanket. He just pointed out, hey, there's a blanket, right? I mean, he didn't make it or anything.
Right.
And so it's something we've talked about. The estimate of GDP for the second quarter is anywhere from down 35% to down 50%, which is a horrific number. And the markets were discounting all of this. People say it's forward-looking. They say it's whatever. You know what? It's flow. If more people are buying stocks than selling, the market goes up. And frankly, that's where a lot of people have their savings for retirement. They need it to go up. Mm-hmm. And so they see it start to come back, and they just kind of pile into it. It's a momentum game. And so the markets became divorced from the economy. It can only go so far. Jay Powell's comments came out just on Wednesday, ahead of initial jobless claims again yesterday on Thursday, which were, another 1.5 million. And so the point is, there's still lots of people unemployed, and the GDP is not rising right now. It's coming back some. And by the way, this lurking COVID infection rate coming back has everybody going, wait a second, maybe we did open kind of a little too soon, or we're not done with this, so we have to kind of slow down. And so it was all those things together. And as you pointed out, the markets had come back. The S&P and NASDAQ were both positive for the year, the NASDAQ hitting new highs. And you have to ask yourself, should we be at new highs when GDP is supposed to be down almost 50% for the quarter and unemployment's going to be 10 for the year? Come on, that made no sense.
Didn't make a whole lot of sense, but although we did get that positive, very positive jobs report for last month that came out last week, which of course didn't offset the 20 million. It was up 2.5 million, I believe, but of course the month before was down like about 20.5 million. So.
Right, and so it's positive in as much as the unemployment rate went from 14.7 down to 13.3. But it's still 13.3% unemployment and 30% higher than it was in the great financial crisis. So come on already,
Yeah. Maybe instead of the wet blanket, it was just a shot of reality. Maybe that we all needed. But what is the implication of all of that as we head into the election season and potentially more relief packages from getting passed? We saw that one package from the House that's sitting on the Senate's desk. Seemed like there might be, and we heard earlier in the week from Secretary Treasurer Mnuchin that he expects another round of stimulus checks to households and to support businesses. So is that something we could see one more big package before we get into the election?
We're definitely going to get another relief package because all the politicians need it, right?
Yeah.
The White House needs it because clearly we still have a bunch of issues and they can't be seen as leaving people out to dry, particularly when we get to the end of the unemployment bonus checks on July 31st. We can expect some version of those to go forward, whether it's a continuation of those checks or there's various proposals out there, but something's going to happen because the Democrats need to say, see, we're taking care of you and our heart's in the right place, and the Republicans can't be seen as the opposite. So it's going to happen.
No, and even any potentially squeamish Republicans, I think Trump would definitely lean on them because, as you point out, that will buoy his reelection hopes if he could say, look, we did something. We did 2 rounds, and all this money for businesses and these checks to individuals for households. So I think, that the political pressure will be high to do that.
Right, but and it gets kind of wonky in here. But you have to remember some of what the Fed is talking about is holding interest rates at zero essentially for 2 years. There wasn't a person in the group that did not think that interest rates would remain at zero both this year and next, and only 2 out of the 14 saw them going up in 2022. And so if they're holding rates near zero and yet, the rate of inflation out there is positive, which it is, of course, it's running about 1.2%, then what it means is your dollars are losing value. And so what they're essentially doing is sweeping value from savers to the government. That's what's going on. It's called financial repression. And it's going to continue. And so that's the big news in the economic world. Like I said, a little wonky, probably not worth going into. But if you have money in a savings account or a CD, just understand you're going to get zero for years. And it's because of the Fed.
Sorry, and that's why we all need the stock market to go up, right? Because that's basically our only hope.
That is part of the driver is people turn around and go, well, my goodness, there's no really other liquid place to go, right? You're going to buy a rental home that could go down in value, or you have to deal with all this stuff. I mean, it's choices are slim out there.
Absolutely. Rodney, let's talk about defunding the police. This is something you've been reporting on for over the last week, really since these demands have been coming out. You've written a number of articles on this topic. There's something that came out just on the Now, this was the demands of the crowd, essentially, that then politicians said, yeah, let's do it. And then they said, well, I don't know if I really want to do it because they're trying to explain maybe or abolish the police, even that kind of language, because the American people are not in favor of, getting rid of all the cops. I think what they'd like to see is some reform, which we can get into. And then speaking of that, I have a YouGov poll says, the question here was, do you favor or oppose cutting funding for police departments? 25% in favor, 53% oppose. I also have the same question or similarly worded question from Rasmussen. They found just 25% favor defunding the police, and also a second question, which is interesting. Do you think a police-free society is possible? 16% And I think all those are, as you hinted at, maybe we can hit at later, is they may all be heading to Seattle. But what do you think, Rodney? Just maybe let's start generally about this idea of, well, do you support defunding the police? Is that even a reality? What do you think about police reform? And will that reform include maybe gutting some of these budgets or something like that? Or is it just a much bigger systemic problem that's not as simple as saying, cut their money?
Yeah, I go backwards on that. Defunding the police, starting with starving the beast is rarely a good idea. That's always been the idea with the federal government, right? Give it less money and it'll have to figure out how to live on less. Mm-hmm. It will. You just won't like what it looks like. And so if you take a police department and immediately cut its funding, then what's going to happen is the people who remain there are going to decide how to spend that remaining money. And chances are you won't like how they prioritize if you didn't like how they prioritized in the past. And so it starts with, let's see reform, and let's start with what appears to be, on people's minds, which is how people are treated when they are approached by the police or how the police escalate use of force. Yeah. Now, I'm the first to look at numbers. And so Heather McDonald, Ronald Fryer, some others have done really good work on this as to how that actually happens numerically. And the press is clearly sensationalizing a lot of this, but are you going to believe me or your lying eyes, right? I mean, go look at video of how people are treated in different instances. And George Floyd, of course, being, the biggest example right this moment.
Well, now are you talking, just if I could step in, you mean over what are you saying here? What numbers? Are you talking about the number of people killed by police per year or unarmed
the number of people killed by police and the number of instances of them using lethal force and the decline over a long period of time? And so the numbers are out there, but it doesn't mean that you stop working on this. Right. And so we should go find the best examples we can of what we can agree as society is a proper progression of use of force, and then train it. And then say, hey, this should be the gold standard, and let's do that. So before we talk about changing the funding, let's talk about what the funding is going to be used for. If that leads to less funding for some areas of police forces, great. I mean, why isn't that a good thing? It can put money toward other things in city budgets, or God forbid, lower taxes. That would be a wonderful thing. But let's start with what we want it to look like before we start talking about how we want to change the value going into it.
Yeah, Rodney, I want to bounce off an argument that I read. I think it's basically not applicable, but it made me think. Someone said, far more people are killed by doctors and medical malpractice than are by police. Is that a valid? And there aren't any mass protests about that. That seems like an apples and oranges thing, doesn't it?
Clearly, apples and oranges. It's headline baiting there.
Yeah, okay.
I put that out there because more people are killed in car accidents, but it's not like car accidents have the ability to pull a gun on me and demand that I do certain things.
Right, exactly.
And so it's really, let's go with not applicable.
I agree. Okay, I just wanted to, if there was an angle there that maybe because if you had seen that one, and I don't know. Anyway, so let's move on there. But what about the idea of the police unions? You've written about this. I spoke about this with Zach and the BS Pod. That seems to be one good line of attack. Particularly, there was a Wall Street Journal article who cited the Derek Chauvin, the one who's accused of second-degree murder on George Floyd, had, I believe, a dozen complaints against him. And one of the other officers had to settle a lawsuit. And as you mentioned, we go back to that example of the Parkland shooting. One of the officers who wouldn't go inside, he was fired for cowardice and then got reinstated. But largely, in thank you to the unions who fought for his job, which is fine. That's what they're supposed to do. They're there to support their union members. But if not breaking up the unions, maybe at least reforming them to something where the kind of protection that police get could be maybe breaking down a little bit.
Yeah, I don't agree. So I don't think the job of the union is protect everyone at all cost. I think that's a losing argument. The only person or group I know that holds that position would be an advocate, which would be a lawyer whom you have hired to argue on your behalf to the best of their ability and the fullest of their knowledge. Mm-hmm. Not lying and cheating, but to the best of their ability, no matter what their personal opinion is. And so I don't belong to a union, and so I could be wrong, right? Let's go there and acknowledge that. But I look at police unions and I think you are stronger when the public supports you as a union in what you do. And I would support them much more strongly if I believed they were, and forgive the term, policing some of their own and looking at some of these people and going, you shouldn't be a police officer. A dozen complaints is a problem. And so I just don't believe the argument that you support everyone at all costs, no matter what. It then taints every supporting claim you have, because I don't believe you're judicious in what you're doing. And so I would love to see union reform in a lot of cases, particularly when it's public service unions, because I think they're in a weird place where they're not trading for the value of the other side, which is taxpayers. They're actually trading for the support of the politician who gets to approve or disapprove of what the union wants, which is
right. It creates a perverse incentive, right?
Exactly. But in police unions in particular, it's like, seriously, start with policing your own and making some judicial calls on, who should be part of your group and who shouldn't.
There's going to be a push. Democrats have vowed to come up with some legislation by the end of the month, I believe. And one of the rumored things is to essentially make a national standard or some sort of maybe a national police force that essentially oversees local departments, or to take the enforcement out of the hands of local precincts, local departments, and put them under some sort of a national standard. Do you see that coming down the pike? And do you have any opinion one way or the other if that's a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a hard thing. I struggle with how it's going to be implemented practically, because you run right into the 10th Amendment. And so, all power is not vested, in the federal government. Here are left for the states. And so there is no policing power, no local policing power for the federal government. What they can do is enforce any breach of civil rights, right? Any breach of the amendment, or the Constitution and the amendments. And so that's kind of what's been going on with this qualified immunity, and saying, hey, we're going to make it easier for people to claim and prove that their civil rights have been breached by local police.
What is qualified immunity, for those who don't know?
Qualified immunity is basically any government official who cannot be held liable for acts committed while pursuing their job,
I see.
Except for in very, very small cases. And one of the bad things about qualified immunity is in a Supreme Court ruling years ago, and I don't remember the citation, they said, hey, if the facts aren't really close to if the facts of a precedent are not really close to what we're arguing here, this is going to be tough. And what that means is, if this has never happened before, we're not going to say it's okay here either, which means you can never have a new version of it, which is it just, the whole thing is just crazy, and it should go away. And it protects civil servants in many instances, not just police. And so I am a detractor of that. I think that should go away in large part. But anyway, my point is, I think that there are some things that the federal government can do, but it's really all about rights and what happens later. Proactively having a force that oversees, a force on the ground, that's going to be very difficult. And I think you're going to see pushback, because once again, it's treating everybody the same, as if the police force in, nowhere, Texas is the same as the police force in Dallas, or,
right.
The one in Nebraska is the same as the one in New York. They just have different needs and different groups that they serve. So.
Yeah, agree 100%. Rodney, I always like to point out our elite hypocrisy. So before we move on to our next topic, I want to do a little insertion here, because you mentioned a little bit earlier the idea of COVID coming back a little bit. We're hearing potential reports of a second wave. And it's really, a lot of it's been, did we open up too soon? Of course. We had mass protesting, which our elite, our leaders, they had a really hard time putting that round peg in the square hole. I'm how to explain this, and here's a good example of this. We have Rep. Val Demings, Democrat, not just any Democrat. She was actually the House, one of the House impeachment managers. She says, on June 3rd, we have a chance to make real change now. Persons of all age, colors, and backgrounds are taking to the streets to express their displeasure and send a message that enough is enough. And then 2 days ago, I joined a Healing in Hope rally last night. rally last night to speak with our community as America grieves. And then just yesterday, Rodney, unfortunately, Florida's experiencing a new surge in COVID-19 cases. I heard you to do everything you can to protect yourself and your neighbors, wear a mask, limit gatherings. And then following up, the president's plan to hold mass rallies in Florida and elsewhere as we experience a resurgence in COVID cases is irresponsible and selfish. What do you think of that stance, Rodney? They're going to try this, aren't they?
Well, I mean, it's not try, right? And it's the same old thing of, whatever your priorities are, they're clearly the ones that everybody should adhere to, and other priorities are secondary. And so, unfortunately, it's the same game, and it makes people look at you and think the other things you say are now tainted because you do this, right?
Yes.
You tell me that people should go out in this one instance, which is clearly an important thing to do. I get that. But in this other instance, which is clearly important, people want to go exercise their right for who's going to be the president and lead and be the next leader of the United States of America, is less important. And so it's like, you would think those two particular things are tied together in some way, shape, or form. But what do I know?
Do you think the virus deems one more important than the other, or is it an equal treatment?
Now look at you, race baiting, or baiting there with headlines. Clearly, the virus doesn't care. I'm interested. I am interested to see where the hot spots come from, because we are seeing rising cases in Texas and Arizona and some other places. And so, where did they come from? And I haven't seen that yet. I assume the data is either out there or coming quickly to let us know. Is it coming from protests? Is it coming from businesses? Is it coming from vacation spots? Is it coming from the beach? I don't know. I would be interested to see that.
Yeah, same here. And let's just hope, regardless of how it happened, that the numbers are small. Because even though, despite this, we don't want anybody getting sick for any reason. So
I don't. But I'll tell you, I in a weird way, and this is a positive thing. So the protests appear to be drawing more young people. Which of course would make sense.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, if there is some spread of COVID in that group, it actually could be positive in that they tend to be asymptomatic, and it would actually improve herd immunity. And so I would be hopeful that if people were testing positive but did not have symptoms and were not ill. I don't want anybody ill and suffering.
Right.
But I would love to see us as a society move closer toward herd immunity so that we could knock this virus down before we get to a big second wave in the fall.
Yeah. Great point, Rodney. All right, Rodney, I want to bring up an article you wrote in informedamerican.com. As we've seen, a lot of people, the protests are still going on, and many of them have been taking to monuments, various cities, various statues of figures that are either offensive to them or were not necessarily always good people. They've been pulling these statues down. One of the targets, Rodney, has been Christopher Columbus, and the title of this article said, "Did they get the wrong statue? Richmond protesters throw Columbus statue in the lake." And you're saying that might not have been their target. So let's tell me what the heck happened here in Richmond, Rodney.
Yeah, so Richmond's kind of an interesting case in that it has a big statue of Robert E. Lee. And Governor Northam of Virginia got a motion passed in the state legislature to remove that statue. And so you would think that in Richmond they were pulling down Civil War statues. But no, this group pulled down Christopher Columbus and threw it in a lake.
Yeah.
It turns out they were protesting or holding a rally, whatever they called it, to honor indigenous people, which most of us think of as Native Americans or Native Indians or whatever you want to call them. And so they kind of had the right person. And so they did have the right person that they thought was their point of anger. And so is what it is. I've always been of the mind that if they're your statues, when I say yours, I mean your city, your county, your state, whatever, vote as to what you want to do with them. And if you want to remove them, it's clearly your right to do that.
Right.
And so, the state of Virginia elected the legislature, elected the governor, and they are moving to take down Lee. They get to do what they want to do. I'm not about protesters doing it in the dead of night. That still sounds like vandalism to me, and I am not a fan.
No, they did get Columbus and Minneapolis as well, and I don't believe there was anything. I do agree though. Yeah, I think this should go the proper channels. It should not just letting whatever it literally becomes mob rule. Something else going on, Rodney. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but I'm just going to ask you something that this has been going on. Basically, looking at maybe offensive material. This is not the first time it's happened, but there was a story that HBO had pulled Gone with the Wind from its streaming service. I've never seen the movie, so I can't really speak to the allegations that it glorifies pre-war South. I just haven't seen the movie. Do you have an opinion on that? And in terms of if you want to call it a cancel culture kind of a thing, do you think this was a smart move or any opinion on that?
Oh, it's cancel culture. There's no question. I mean, you're having people sit around and say this piece of literary history in the United States, which has been clearly enjoyed by millions of people. And Margaret Mitchell, who wrote the book, she only wrote one book, but she wrote one heck of a great book, apparently. I must admit, I've seen parts of the movie because, as a kid growing up, it was on television. It seemed like once a year.
Okay.
It was done in 1939. But I got bored of it. I mean, I think of it as, a chick flick. I think of it it's a love story. And, that's me personally, how I looked at it. I understand their point because the pieces of it that I remember, it was this, caring relationship, with the slaves, as if the slaves were happy to be there and part of this loving family. And I get that characterization.
Yeah.
Probably not correct. But as far as getting rid of it, I think that's useless. People get to choose what they watch on HBO Max, right? Mm-hmm. And so if they're not tuning in to Gone with the Wind, if they choose they don't want to watch it anymore, drop it because it's not popular. But dropping it because you think you get to be the arbiter of, American literary and cinematic history, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, good point. On this statue and monument thing, still they have there's a petition to remove a Thomas Jefferson statue at the University of Missouri, but at least they're trying. At least they're not going to rip it down first. They're going to go through some sort of a process. A couple of things. Another one here. This was in Philadelphia. There's a statue of abolitionist Matthias Baldwin that was defaced. Also there's another one. I don't know if you've ever been to Boston, but there's a monument for the 54th Regiment, which was an all-black regiment. Maybe if you've seen the movie Glory, it's depicted there. They defaced that monument. So it seems like it's just, I mean, certainly maybe, they going after Columbus. I get it. He's a big target. Robert E. Lee, that makes sense. But it does seem to just be blanket. On the other hand, just blanket mob, whatever. They just see a target and I'm just going to either spray paint it, rip it down, even if I don't know who the person is or what they did.
Right. And so, for me, the trouble is starting with they, because they is not everyone. The person who was part of defacing the 54th Regiment in Boston is not the same person who threw Columbus in the lake in Richmond, Virginia.
Right.
Or at least I hope not. That's a lot of travel.
Well, you never know.
But that's why I look at this and I think, look, if you are defacing, destroying, removing a monument in the middle of the night or the middle of the day with a tow rope and a mask, you are not in the right place and you should be arrested for that and charged with vandalism, destruction of property, and all those other things. If you want to get rid of these, there is a way to do it, and it's really pretty straightforward. Your city council, your government entity can take part of that, and chances are they're pretty receptive right now. And so that would separate, the people who are doing this because they believe there's a social reason, and the people who are doing it just because they're a bunch of thugs and vandals out there to destroy anything they can find.
Well, but isn't it up to the local departments to make sure this stuff doesn't happen? I don't know what.
But separating those two in the midst of protests of thousands of people gets a little bit harder. And so, it's a hard job, right? But hey, let's defund it and see what happens.
Yeah, right. The solution in London for Winston Churchill, that's been swirling for a couple of days, of pulling down Churchill, which is essentially the national hero of England, at least, or the United Kingdom. The solution here is to put a large box around the statues. What do you think of that technique?
I guess it's better than ringing it with an electric fence. But
is it?
It's a conversation, and Cecil Rhodes of the Rhodes Scholar is a noted person who's going to have his statue taken down. Thomas Jefferson started the University of Virginia. He got a big statue there, and so you're gonna see a lot of these things happen. And I guess I'm not about going backward through history to see previous things that we can look at and make them a point of anger. I'm more about going forward and saying, let's figure out what we can do from here to make this great. But like I said, local people get to vote. That's the way it should be. The rest of it's just vandalism to me.
Rodney, it's not just holding people who lived in a different time to modern morality. It's holding them to modern morality at June 12th at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, because on June 13th, we could have a new morality, and June 12th morality is seen as disgusting and horrible and needs to be destroyed. So I think that's sort of the issue. And I'm going to leave you with this quote from 1984. I read it as a kid. I didn't understand it, and now I'm understanding it more. There's one that stuck out to me. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has altered. And in that process is continuing day by day. History has stopped. Any significance there, or am I fishing the too big pond?
Well, I don't think it's fishing. I think we're trying to understand and better wrap our heads around, this, because, a lot of these monuments and other things, they weren't put up at the time that the person, was doing whatever was glorified.
Right.
Columbus clearly discovering the New World, or getting close anyway. He ended up in the Caribbean. But discovering it from the point of Europe, you go read 1491, there was a whole bunch of stuff going over here when people waved at him from the shore when he showed up. It's not like, there was nobody around and nothing had ever happened.
Right.
Slavery didn't start in the U.S. I mean, it had been going on, I guess, since, people roamed the earth and somebody was stronger than somebody else.
And apparently continues depending on where you go in the world.
It does. But anyway, the point is, you want to come to reconciliation with your history and have everybody in your population say, look, I think I've got a fair shot at going forward from here. But again, reaching backward and revising by removing seems like a really bad idea, because now you're erasing history. So you can't remember it so that you don't repeat it. You kind of took it out.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, great point, Rodney. It's not that we need to have a statue of every bad person in the world, but if we pretend if we cover our eyes and plug our ears and pretend these things don't exist, that doesn't help. Absolutely. Before we get out of here, Rodney, you mentioned this thing, so I will bring it up. The situation going on in Seattle, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, as they've been calling it. I'd love to get your thoughts on the goings on here. Is this a potential model for the rest of the country?
I love CHAZ, which is, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, this group of protesters, armed, by the way, because
with walls also, by the way.
Walls, yeah, but it's legal to carry weapons in Washington State, and so a lot of them do have them.
Yeah.
And the police backed up. And so they put a sign up that said, you're now leaving the United States and entering this, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which they call CHAZ. And I love it because I want them to be autonomous. And so I want them to figure out how they're going to deal with their trash and how they're going to get food. And I think
electricity.
Exactly. Cut off the electricity. And so let's see how this works out, because running anything from a small city to a nation is difficult and takes a lot of administration and coordination. And I'm not sure that exists there. And to prove the point, they did send out a call for more food because they had invited the homeless to be part of their group. And apparently they ate all the food. And so they asked for a replacement of plant-based vegan meat substitute and soy and oats and things. But the city did drop off porta potties and dumpsters, which I thought, wait a second, this turns into international aid, and I'm not sure that's what you want to do, because if this place is autonomous, they should be dealing with it themselves. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. It is interesting to watch. Now, I'm not going to bore you with my little rant here, but for all of you watching, I talked about this yesterday to our Facebook group. We also have the video. I covered this and here on the YouTube channel. You can check that out. And what I'll say is this is an interesting example because it reveals where power lies in the United States. That is my contention. So check out that video if you want to hear what I had to say.
Well, but before we leave that topic, let's be clear. It was the city of Seattle that allowed this to happen and instructed the police department to pull back before anybody was hurt and say, look, just let it be. And so the police chief said, look, the public supports this. And I am a believer in their right to do it. I poke fun at them, but I'm poking fun at a city that I don't live in and don't pay taxes in. And so I have no claim on what they do. If this is how they want to proceed and they believe it moves them forward, go ahead, right? It's yours. And so, as long as you're not abridging anybody's federal rights, then, have at it. But that's what makes states different, right? I can't imagine that happening in my state or yours. But again, I'm not asking anybody in Seattle to come down and make the rules in Texas either. So,
right. Rodney, bless your libertarian heart.
Local rule.
Rodney, I also want to thank you for coming on. I want you all to become informed Americans by subscribing to this channel. If you're enjoying this content, to hit the like button and comment on anything we've discussed today. Also, I want you to visit informedamerican.com and as well as realhealthynews.com and to get all that content in your inbox every day. You just head over to those sites, put in your email, and you'll get all great stories in your inbox every single day. Rodney, looking ahead to the next couple of days, what do you have your eye on in terms of politics, the markets, what that people can expect to get, the kind of stories they might expect to get into their inbox over the next few days?
Well, I assume something's going to happen with this, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and that's going to be kind of fun to watch as to what it is. Yeah. I think the reform is coming, as we talked about in Congress, and so we're going to get a couple of bills on what that might be in terms of some national standards for police, but not a national force in any way, shape, or form. And then we do have the election. I mean, we kind of forget it, but it is coming back. The discussion about the Republican convention, or at least the big parts of it, headed to Jacksonville. Yeah. And then it's going to be a question of Biden getting back on the national stage in a big way and starting to be more in front of the camera and getting more FaceTime. I mean, clearly he was put aside in a sense of the COVID-19 took center stage and then the protest, but he's going to get more time, and it'll be interesting to see what he says, and even his running mate. I don't know that he's going to announce it soon. I assume he's going to wait for the convention, but that sort of thing is going to heat up.
Do you see it? Do you see the comments from former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe that says Biden is better off in the basement? Did you see that?
I did not.
Well, I think most strategists agree, but Biden will have to get out there. And as we saw before all this, it's just amazing, Rodney. Trump comes off victorious off of impeachment. Biden looks like he can't get his story straight. And then it's sort of like we entered a time warp, and none of that even happened anymore because of the coronavirus and now the thing with the George Floyd. So we're going to get into a real election season, I guess, right? I mean, it's June. And then it's really in full swing by the conventions in August. So certainly keep an eye on as we get closer to that, and of course maybe the controversy surrounding the Trump rallies. So, Rodney, thank you so much. Oh, do you have a last thing?
Last thing. I mean, the virus is awful, and I wish it didn't happen, nor the economic shutdown, and certainly not the George Floyd issue and all the protests. But we were saved from political ads. And so, there is the backside where we're not being beaten on the head every other second about, the terribleness of the other side, whatever that is.
Oh yeah, and you remember the Bloomberg Blitz? I still have shows on my DVR, and I'm playing, and it's like Mayor Bloomberg is the right man for the country, and it's like every other commercial break. I'm like, no, I thought this was over.
And you're in Florida, and so you're going to get this, every other minute of the day when it heats up until the election day.
Absolutely brutal, and not just in Florida, but in a swing tri-county area. So yeah. Yep. Bad stuff here for those who live along the I-4 corridor. So, for Rodney Johnson, I'm Dave Oakenquist telling you to get informed, America.
You've been listening to Get Informed, America, brought to you by the Informed American Radio Network. Please like and subscribe today in order to get new exclusive weekly episodes. Any questions, thoughts, or comments can be sent directly to info@informedamerican.com. And don't forget to visit informedamerican.com to keep up with real, smart news. Until next time, fight fake news and find common ground.